case, I think we should kick off with our fabulous Janet, who's going to be our first reader of tonight. So let me tell you a bit about Janet Philo as she comes to the microphone. So Janet is based in Ashbourne, Derbyshire. Janet began writing after bringing up her family and a career in education. She has 2 published solo pamphlets and works in anthology for both adults and children. She loves to share her poetry live and mix it up with her husband's guitar music. So please go absolutely wild for Janet as she comes to the microphone. Woohoo!
Okay, hi everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, brilliant. I actually don't have any poetry for you tonight. When it was lockdown, I lived in Redcar. I lived 100 meters from the beach, and you could have had worse lockdowns than that. And I thought maybe one day someone will want to know what this strange time was like. So every day at the beginning of lockdown, I wrote a blog until my brother complained and said, "We don't want your words about our family all over the internet." So it became a private diary, and it became about Iris, the virus survivor, and her man, rather than Janet and Phil, which it was originally. So this part of the diary was the beginning, the very beginning of it. And it is now on a really cool app called Geo Stories, read by an actor. And there are really super stories on there. This is just a little thing where you can walk along with your headphones in and the story goes with you. So I really recommend having a look at Geo Stories. This is just a little thing on it. So just, okay. Across. Sorry, I'm struggling to see the screen with a thing, with a box. There's a box across my screen. I'll just try and make it go away. Right. Iris, the virus survivor, and her man. Together, we'll survive. We stand on the dunes, and that's what we decide. We've still got so much to do together. Minute by minute, hour by hour, we thank the universe or Pear's soap or whatever it is that's keeping us well. Then feel guilty because we are and because we have each other. Wake up, check we are still well. I wish I was religious. If I were, I'd thank God, but he's not in my head. So I thank Pears instead and drag H off for a socially distanced beach walk before breakfast. We encounter a neighbour and chat with the width of the road between us. We feel safe. We still wash our hands on our return, just in case. We do a bit of yoga. H doesn't do yoga, but these are exceptional circumstances, and he has a go at a relaxing yoga flow. We'll work on it. Heard from our youngest son. His business can't continue. He's a self-employed tattoo artist. He's going to stop smoking and take up running. How do you live on nothing? Our eldest still has a salary, but must tell 2 colleagues tomorrow that they no longer do. Retirement with good health is not a bad place to be. Age puts us at risk, but the pension keeps coming in. Just signed up to help with shopping and car ferrying for a group of friends that might need help. Go to bed with a brandy. We don't drink. Woke up well again, both of us. Thank Pears. Head spinning with ideas to help youngest son's business through this. Think like a virus. Mutate and survive. If people can't come in for tattoos, put the design on a t-shirt and sell via social media. Everyone needs a new top for Zoom meetings, but no one has the money to buy. out on the bikes this morning as fresh spring sun is shining its disinfectant down on us. Getting a bit obsessed by fresh air and sunshine. We both love being outdoors and cheat a bit on the once-a-day rule. There's plenty of space on the beach. Sorted the kitchen cupboards out. We only do stuff like this during a pandemic. A neighbour has just knocked on the door. We spoke at a decent distance. She apologised for her asthmatic cough and I apologised for the tickle in my throat because I'd just eaten the nuts I found when sorting out the kitchen cupboards. Woke up well. Both of us, again. We had toast in bed. We never have toast in bed. The world is becoming unrecognisable. I woke up early with park-run nerves. I always do on a Saturday. I didn't start running until I was 59, and some would say that running is not quite the verb to describe how fast I go. But I go, and I love it. There's no park run today. Today's the day we have toast in bed.
Thank you so much, Janet. Go absolutely wild for Janet.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. There was so much that resonated with me in that. Yeah, it just, yeah, so recognized so much of that. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Janet. So if you're new to our way of doing things and you don't usually have words up on a screen when you also have a performer, just to let you know that you can hover your cursor over the little split between the performer's face and the words, and you can make it smaller or bigger. You can also do that on your phone with your finger. So if you don't want to look at the words, or you need to have the words bigger, you can make it either bigger or smaller depending on what you need. Just a little heads up. If you find it a bit distracting, or you end up finding that you're reading the words instead of looking at the performer, or vice versa, there you go. Amazing. Well, I have a real treat for you. I have our mini spotlight next, and let me tell you a bit about Rochelle Hanslow as she comes to the microphone. So Rochelle Hanslow is Scottish born and based. She's a neurodivergent and chronically ill poet and writer. Her work explores femininity, connection, and things our bodies hold through memory and satire. She has been widely anthologised and was recently published in Witch magazine. Rochelle has featured on Eat the Storm's poetry podcast and has regularly performed online through Off the Chest and Poetry in Pyjamas alongside some of her favourite writers, Laurie Ogden, Helen Mort, Rebecca Perry, and many more. She's currently working towards securing her first pamphlet publication under the editorial guidance of poet Laurie Bolger. That's amazing. All right, fantastic. Well, take it away, Rochelle. Woo, woo, woo.
Thank you, Rue, and the TWOOMPH team for having me here tonight and allowing me to share my work in an inclusive and supportive space. As said in my bio, I have the privilege of being mentored by Laurie Bolger, who I am now honoured to also call a lovely friend. She describes my work as fizzy and punchy, a bit like myself, so I hope you enjoy it. The poetry I'm reading tonight is all in my currently unpublished pamphlet, tentatively called Kites Are Always Getting Stuck in Trees. So, let's begin. The way women bleed. We pretend that there isn't popcorn spilled on the kitchen table, that the sink is empty, that we don't need to plunge the toilet as we drive together singing rock classics down the motorway. We call back the days of sitting in restaurants, wearing a pink tiara, looking out the window at one for sorrow, bathing in puddles, in gutters, waiting for two for joy, before we were emotional tampons, being asked not to become an ice pack to their balls, hoping, are you married? Never turns to, how married are you? On the leg of my glasses it says Glynis, and I wonder if this is why I never feel like myself. The next poem is entitled Belgique, and it is about a moment I had on the only Christmas I spent with an ex in his home of Belgium. And I'm sure once we read the poem, you'll see why it was only once. So, Belgique. So much unsaid, but nothing to do with our differing languages. Christmas Eve, all sitting around your mother's table, missing home and my will to live. Starter is served. Awkwardness. Frog legs. I knew she was a bitch. Inwardly, I panic as you smother my feelings in frog's legs and garlic butter and tell me it tastes just like chicken. It's still frog legs. How do I people please my way around this? I sympathise with that frog. My legs want to run, don't want to be eaten by the fear that's making me crippled. I'm terrified for the frog, but more so of the glares and your disappointment. Thank you. The next one is called Crustaceans, and it's after the wonderful poet Alice Frecknell. This was actually a free write that I wrote in Laurie Bolger's Sunday Morning Breakfast Club, and it just reminded me of actually how much I love all the different kind of seashells you can get. So yes, this is Crustacean. After Alice Frecknell. I remember circle time and my whispers into a conch shell. I trusted something empty more than the full bodies around me. On a beach in St Andrews, I'd gather all the shells into my palm, feel how smooth the insides were, put some to my ear to hear the sea. The last thing they wanted to say, now stuck in my eardrum. I want a tattoo of a hermit crab to remind me to leave my home house, to grow inside another. I never eat shellfish. You can never tell the last time their homes were cleaned. Nobody ever thought the patterns on the shell of the body of a shell were unsightly. They never told them to be slimmer, less sharp, never asked them to be quiet. In restaurants and bathroom stalls, they still slurp the guts from holes. They were told it's where the heart would be. My aunt has always called me Shell, while a princess likes to call me selfish. But I clean my home every Saturday. I keep my life private. Thank you. The next two poems come with a little bit of a trigger warning. With having neurodivergence, I have quite a few comorbidities, and one of the comorbidities with it is body dysmorphia for myself. So there's a part of that, but there's also a part that I'm discussing miscarriage. So if this does affect you, please use your discernment and be gentle with yourself. A body of text. I love how baggy jumpers are a safe place and prison all in one. I know my body doesn't mean to be out of sync with my soul. I love the feeling of having my ears cleaned and collarbone stroked. I love that my arms or legs are my toothbrush as it dances elaborately in my mouth. I don't have any tonsils. I know my eyes are made of numbers and symbols on a piece of paper in a filing cabinet. I swapped Glynis for Juliana to sit on my face and bring me clarity. I know my hips and ribs are as restless as my mind and never want to stay where they are. I love to watch the needles hammer ink into my skin, like fingers on piano keys, making a patchwork of memories. I know my teeth feel at home chewing my lips. I love the release around my ribcage as I take off my bra and how glad I am I never wear socks. I know my womb has housed 3 souls and only birthed 2. This next one's called Little Lily Rebel, and this has actually just been confirmed to be in an upcoming anthology. So I hope you enjoy. Again, please just be careful. Little Lily Rebel. My internet connection keeps telling me it's unstable. He tells me he's attached to the length of his hair more than people. I tell him about a memo block my granny bought me once. It looked more like a jewellery box made of sturdy cardboard, Monet's water lilies printed all over it. I used to love opening the lid and then letting it fall, ruffling the small, white squares of paper. I tell him about the person who once told me they could tell a lot about me for liking Monet. From far away, you're okay. Up close, you're just a mess. I tell him about my own body paint dots that started yesterday, that have now begun to stain my thighs, beginning and end of life on small, square tissues. I'm expected to flush, wash it down with plenty of fluids, easy swallow paracetamol, pamphlets to read, in my own time. This is the last poem of my set tonight. So before I do that, I just want to again thank everybody here for listening, and for Rue and the team for giving me this space. It really is such a blessing when you're neurodivergent and chronically ill to have a place like this. So thank you very much. This last one is called I Am the Audacity, and it's for anybody here or out there that's ever been two. I am all these twos. I am the audacity. Too fat, too loud, too weird, too sensitive, too picky, too quiet, too bookish, too stubborn, too tall, too smart, too emotional, too quirky, too sarcastic, too angry, too lazy, too forgetful, too tattooed, too surly, too childish, too outspoken, too much. Thank you.
Amazing. Feel free to unmute yourselves and go absolutely wild for the fabulous Rochelle Hanslow.
Yes, too much.
Amazing. Oh, Rochelle, thank you so much for sharing your pieces with us tonight. The chat's going wild, so feel free to make sure you read those as well. But thank you again. That was amazing. All right, everyone, are you ready for our next reader? We've got the fabulous Theodore Forster. Let me tell you about them as they come to the microphone. So Theodore is a queer poet based in the Northeast. They are the captain of Durham's slam team, which has just returned from competing in Birmingham. Ooh, for Uni Slam. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Theodore has been published in the Recesses Zine and Agapanthus Collective. In their spare time, they enjoy watching films and baking. Please go absolutely wild for Theodore as they come to the microphone. Woo!
Hi, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been a bit of a wild past couple of weeks, so I'm very happy to hear some Northern poets again, because there was a sad lack of Northern poets at Uni Slam. Going to return next year with just the most Northern group of people that we can ever possibly put together. I've come to the realization that I want my poems to be weird and bizarre, so that's what these next two poems are going to be. This first one is called Jackie. It has trigger warnings for blood and murder. So if you want to leave, fair enough, don't blame you. Yeah, this is Jackie. Dear Jackie, I can't tell if the blood is mine or his. I don't know if it was JFK who got shot that day or me. The blood is all over this letter, your dress, and the White House. They used it to sign fucking laws. When Lyndon took the oath, I imagine he held his hand on a blood-soaked Bible and looked you dead in the eyes, and I think you would know that he did it. Or maybe I did. It's only a matter of time before people get suspicious, Jackie. I want to keep my name out of the papers, and I want you to rest in peace, but you are everywhere I go. I used to have this irrational fear I was going to get shot, and I think maybe that was you trying to keep me safe. Jackie, I'm sorry that all people think of when they think of you is your husband. You deserve better than that, and you deserve to move on. I think you are still covered in blood that you can't wash off. I'd like to learn how to dry clean and sew and grave rob so I could give you back your pink suit fashioned into a blanket to keep you warm. Jackie, I'd like to steal your collarbone if you'd let me. I want to return some of you to your childhood home. Vogue says that it is light and airy, and I don't think they acknowledge how sad you were. I wanted to read your love letters too, but Vogue wants me to pay for them, and to be honest, Jackie, I don't want to pay to be jealous. Jackie, I am sorry JFK was such a slut. Inside his body there is at least one bullet and a used condom where a heart should be. You were beautiful and broken-hearted, and your hands were rubbed raw from desperately holding your marriage together. I'd take care of your wounds, Jackie, tidy with antiseptic and Savlon. I'd use the plasters that you liked, the ones that smelled like cardamom and always made you think of your granddad. You'd feel like a child again. You'd be shocked to see your own blood. Jackie, please write me back. Thank you. This next poem is called God Box. It's about an old friend of mine from Stockton and the bizarre thing they told me one day in a conversation that I then couldn't stop thinking about for about 3 years. So yeah, this poem contains references to queerness and religion. So again, if that's something that you don't want, feel free to dip out. Completely understand it. So yeah, this is God Box. You once told me that God is in a box in a Catholic school in Stockton-on-Tees. You realised you were gay at age 13 in a morning assembly. Found divinity hidden in love notes etched into the floorboards. Imagined they had been written for you. Traced the lines of your fingernails, committing guilt to memory. I think you knew that your love would always feel like a sin, so you surrounded your heart with the fear of God. You saw the Tees Bridge every day on your way to school, slowly sinking, threatening to collapse. Saw crucifixes in the support beams and felt nails in your hand. Suddenly thirsty for something, and couldn't see your reflection. It took years to get it back. Was there a point where you began to look like you again? Which is to say, you look blasphemic. You have shed your chance at salvation in early morning trickled light and sleeping in on Sundays. One day you looked in the box, found nothing worth praying to. Buried your rosary and Bible in the garden, and the next summer lilies grew. Counted the petals and recited that love note. You were surprised you could still remember it. That pretty girl who met your eyes in that assembly hall all those years ago thought it was you in that box. Your agony used to have some higher purpose, now it just hurts. You looked for God in the pockets of your old school coats, wondering if maybe that's where he went when you were kissed for the first time. You attended the funeral of your own faith. You wore yellow and did not invite your mother. Checked the casket, just in case. Planted a rose on the lid as they lowered it. Did not sing the hymns, did not recite the prayers. We don't talk anymore since you buried your kindness with your faith. I still think of you when I see the Tees Bridge, when I go past a Catholic church. I still think about that box in that school in Stockton-on-Tees. Now there's this empty space in you, where your God used to live. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Theodore. And yeah, I hope you have some time to catch your breath after Uni Slam. For those of you who don't know, that is the kind of massive national university poetry slam competition that happens every year. And lots of universities send a little team, and it's brilliant, but also I think it's quite intense from what I remember. So absolutely brilliant. Pleased you were there. Amazing. Represent. Fantastic. Well, for our final reader of the first half, we have the fabulous Tony. So let me tell you a little bit about Tony as she comes to the microphone. Tony, can you be a little wave? Just, oh yeah, you are there. Excellent. That is amazing. All right, smashing. All right, so Tony is a fibromyalgia and mental illness sufferer who lives in Stockton-on-Tees with her cat, Fred. She started writing poetry last year to help her to cope. We've had her before at TWOOMPH. She's absolutely fabulous. Please give it up for Tony as she comes. Whoop, whoop, whoop.
Sorry if my cat screams while I'm on mic. He tends to start screaming about this time every night. So yeah, sorry if he screams. Okay, so I'm not very confident with my poetry yet, but I've just got a couple to share. So the first one's called Hell, and I guess it's probably a lot about mental health, really, I guess, and just my current experience. Okay, so yeah, it's called Hell. I stare around my concrete cage, its walls like long buried bone, as misery fills my heart. And I begin to wonder, if I were to take a hammer to the dingy walls, would I find beyond them fire and brimstone and demons with forks? Or how about, if I were to take a knife and plunge it into thin air, could I slice into my reality, and would it turn out to be nothing but a veil, which covers the torturers who lie waiting and watching beyond? If not for a wingless, fur-covered creature perched purring on my lap, then perhaps I would think it so. But surely no hell would allow such an angel. So that was the first one. And then the second one, I guess this was mostly about my ex, I guess, but kind of in a more kind of given an image to the way I felt, I guess. So it's called The Vow. Gnarled, bony fingers envelop, clench, and asphyxiate the mess of slippery, red-rivered muscle and tissue which form my failing heart. Sharp-tipped, sinuous talons pierce and puncture, causing ribbons of thick, crimson blood to ooze and chase their way down her mangled, skeletal forearm. Her cracked, thin, bloodless lips curve sneering and cruel. Her empty, dead, clouded eyes stare icily, malevolently into my agonized eyes. Her name, previously unspoken, forms itself on my lips. My voice low, almost a whisper, as I breathe the word, the name, into existence, betrayal. As the deafening silence returns, an idea forms itself in my mind. It arrives first with a pang of sadness which fades to reveal a sense of clarity. I know her vile, repugnant truth. She craves to witness in me the self-same ugliness so obvious in her callous, bitter, merciless, grotesque body, mind, and soul, and I vow solemnly, vehemently, in that moment, that I will never allow this torturous, annihilating pain to contort and shape my being into something so monstrous as her. Yes. Thank you.
Tony. Woo!
Thank you.
Amazing. And I love that you came back to perform for us again. Thank you so much, Tony. That's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Amazing. What a first half. Fantastic. Wow. Let me tell you what happens next. So if you haven't been with us before, or if you have, you know what happens next. When we have a little bit of a break, we have shenanigans. And shenanigans is the part of the show where sometimes we play a game, sometimes we do riddles, sometimes we do something, but I'll always ask you to do a little something. And the nice thing is, if you don't want to, you don't have to. This isn't school, you're fine. The second thing is that it's going to be a bit of a combined comfort break and shenanigans today. So I would like to ask you to join me for a quick game of show and spell tonight. This is where you find objects in your house, beginning with each letter to spell out a word, and today that is spring. So you should end up with 6 letters for six items for 6 letters. Now the fun bit, it's not just finding an object and deciding that that's the one you're going to spell. You are going to decide what letter an item begins with. Persuade us. So let me explain. Example, O for orange. No, I think you'll find it's an S. Source of vitamin C. All right. Jumper. Nah, it's a W. Winter woolly warmer. Okay. So I want you to go as outrageous as you possibly can. If you want to, you are absolutely welcome to just do like a basic spell. That's not a problem at all. I'm going to pop the the instructions into the chat. So if you've just need a second to kind of read over those again, that's absolutely fine. So grab yourself a drink, get comfortable, root around your house for these 6 items to spell out spring. And I'm going to give you 10 minutes to get back here and start sharing your items either in the chat or out loud. So that's, please be back by 1:15. And yeah, good luck. We will, there you go, it's in the chat.
Recycling bin. I do dare you, Shells. I dare you. I double dare you. I triple dare you. All the dares.
I don't know if you'll see it. There we go.
I have a mini one for my
Oh
desk.
my gosh.
And I
Oh,
love
that's
it.
adorable. You definitely win the R for sure. That is wonderful, amazing. Aisha says salt lamp, partner in crime, dog, reading buddy, bookmark, ink provider, pen, nose pleaser, scented candle, and great story book. Fantastic, amazing job, guys. Rochelle says, damn it, note to self, put twinklies on next time. Tony, brain isn't with it. That's absolutely fine. N for noisy demon, my cat Fred. Well, do you know what? Fair enough. But like, I'm glad Fred got involved. That is amazing, guys. Thank you so much. If there's anyone else who wants to share, that's brilliant. But otherwise, we are probably going to head back into the second half as soon as we feel as though we've got most of us in the room. And we will have the fabulous Chris Campbell for you, who is our headliner tonight. Excellent, Chris is here, so we can start, which is very important. Our final one, Andrea says S, sparkling deodorant juice, which is a serum. P, pure and lovely hydrating stuff, water. R, whiz dusty thing, Hoover. I'm loving can I just say how much I love that you all just embraced. You were like, yeah, let's go outrageous. That's absolutely fine, Rue. Thank you for doing that and getting involved. That's amazing. We do lots of different things. Sometimes we make communal poems, sometimes we do all sorts of stuff, but today I was just fancying something a bit silly. So thank you for getting involved, much appreciated. Fantastic. All right, wonderful. Well, I think we should crack on. So Chris, if you're happy, I will start. Let me introduce you to the fabulous Chris Campbell, who is our headliner for tonight. So Chris Campbell is a non-binary Native American immigrant with ADHD. He is a slam champion who writes poetry for performance and publication. He wants you to fall so in love with poetry, queerness, and the oppressed that you wake up one day and change your whole dang life. He's brilliant. He's absolutely fabulous. I think you're going to really enjoy him tonight. Please give it up for Chris Campbell. Woo!
Hey, thank you so much. Really happy to be here. I will just say, really off the bat, like this is a little different than what I normally do. Part of that is Rue mentioned that there was the possibility y'all would be trialing out some themed TWOOMPHs, and because of that, I sort of latched onto the theme, which was colonization, and I've explored that through immigration, which is a big part of my experience of colonization. And so we'll be looking at a lot of that tonight. Some of which is not poetry that I wrote to like kind of read out loud, but I thought it would be really cool to just like have a conversation around that, and just see, you know, what people thought and, you know, explore that a little bit. But I have that project, which was Erasure Poetry, bookended by more narrative pieces. At the beginning and at the end. Both of these are a little bit of older pieces that I have given facelifts. So again, if you like know me really well and you're at all the events I'm at, you'll be like, what? Like this sounds a little bit like old Chris, not necessarily like new Chris. But because it's like a little bit of a refresh, it's like old meets new. So this first one is one that I call Leftovers. And yeah, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. So I'll just dive in. I arrived in England penniless, but eager for true love and a fresh start. Wow, how much farther can you get from homelessness and trailer trash than standing outside Buckingham Palace? My mom asked years after I'd moved. In the States, the poor are born with certain unalienable rights. This includes the right to bear inherent differences, learned behaviors, and unexpected idiosyncrasies that, if you're lucky, are scarlet marks that shift so far from front and center, you might think you've put them behind you, but being out of sight doesn't make them any less targets in other people's minds the moment you begin to forget yourself. But I got lucky, found a loophole, and escaped. The first time I had enough change, I took my wife out to eat pasta. Probably a bit too far out of our price range, but we were young and carefree, surrounded by smiling faces, seemingly signaling safety. So when the server approached me with the bill, I innocently asked for a to-go box and immediately paid the price. Loaded fingers were raised, pointed past my present, and fired away. My mistake was asking for more than I could comfortably consume in a single sitting. No surprise, given the size of my appetite, I was taught to survive by dumpster diving, pocket lining before dining at the cheapest all-you-can-eat buffets. If you did it right, you could last 2 or 3 days, maybe even 4 if you ignored how much napkin you were eating. But apparently, this just wasn't crickets. Maybe that struck a nerve. Oh, whoop. Ooh. Sorry, there's a piece missing here, but that's fine. Maybe that struck a nerve with some of you here tonight. If so, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be rude. The server didn't say anything expressly xenophobic, was simply shocked at what they'd been asked to do. But whatever embarrassment they felt at first was nothing compared to how fast the blood drained from their face when I nodded and asked them to hand me back my plate. As much as I hated hearing my mother mutter it, "We don't waste any part of the buffalo," was too deeply ingrained for me to walk away from anything but an empty plate. I just want to say, I think one of the interesting parts of looking at colonization through the lens of immigration is, it used to be that you had these superpowers who were kind of like spreading their fingers into everyone else's pie. And then now that we live in a little bit more of a global society and surprise, a lot of those previous superpowers still hold a lot of influence and power, and you have people from all over the world who are, making their way to these different countries. It's kind of like, oh gosh, like how dare you come here and mess with our stuff? And it's just, yeah, it's really funny. It reminds me a little bit of how, some people will be like, this generation, they're just a bunch of snowflakes. They're so sensitive. Learn how to take a joke and all of this stuff. And then, the second you say anything bad about anything they care about, it's it's really like the opposite. You have them reacting to such extremes that you're just like, whoa, come on. Like, learn to just say, hey, I love that for you. But anyway, this next part is the erasure poetry I was talking about. It was part of an art exhibition called Becoming British. So it's this series of erasure poems from the Life in the UK test study book, which if you don't know, if you want to become a citizen in this country, or if you even want to stay in this country for all that long, once you hit the stage where you can apply for indefinite leave to remain, it's a 10-year visa. That requires you to take the Life in the UK test. It covers, I think, about 10,000 years of British history in 180 pages, the book does. And the test can be on any of that. And what they did I suppose it's about 10 years ago now. What they did was they combined the English language test with the Life in the UK test to just be like one very confusing test. Carolyn, you took one and failed. Yeah, it's wild. But basically what they've done is they've taken just like the most bizarre, benign, boring questions you could possibly imagine. Like literally like in the book, there are like 8 pages of just like name, occupation, birth date, death date. That's all. And you're like, what? And I'm just supposed to memorize all this. Okay. But also, what's wild is they've taken, because they combined it with the English language test, they just made it the most confusing questions ever. So they took a lot of normal questions and then they're like, yeah, let's just like make this worded in like the most confusing way possible. So you'd have to really have such a strong grasp of English to even be able to tell. But anyway, all of that to say, I've got a couple of photos I'll click through. This was part of, like I said, Becoming British. It was part of the Migration Matters Festival, which takes place in Sheffield and was absolutely amazing. So if we click through another time, boom, there you go, Migration Matters. This is what the exhibition itself actually looked like, my portion of it at least. So we had these 5 different erasure poems, and then underneath a QR code and this little stand that says, if you click through again, are you British enough? And this was like literally the first 15 minutes. And I'll circulate this this slide deck afterwards, actually. So it has a link here to a website where you can take some of the practice tests, and the practice tests are so much easier than the real tests. Like by like a significant degree. I can't tell you enough, but it'd be really interesting, you know, afterwards to, you know, hear if anybody wants to take them, you know, whether or not you passed, what your experience of it was like. But it was just this, you know, quite fascinating way of doing it. And so the introduction that I wrote for the thing was, you know, being an immigrant has humbled me. If you click through again, you'll see this text as well. I'm opinionated, unafraid to go against the grain, yet I've found myself isolated in an alien culture, existing as wrong by default. I live in constant fear of government rules and regulations. Have I accidentally done something that will get me kicked out of the country? It sounds silly, but it's my reality. Which brings me to the Life in the UK test, a divining rod for who can continue existing here. The rest, not British enough, not good enough, undesirables. Yet politicians party their way through a pandemic, watching us huddled at home as we hope we make rent and see our loved ones again. Why should Britishness be measured by conforming to the expectations of these same rich white men? Why should it be measured at all? And if the tables were turned, how many Brits would be British enough for this test? And so this is just, if you're not familiar with Erasure poetry, this is kind of an example of what it can look like. So this is an actual page from the book in the actual format that it was. And I just blacked out all of the sections that weren't relevant to the poems that I was creating by just looking for these kind of alternate narratives that you could explore within that text. However, because this is like really cool to look at if you have time, but it's not great over Zoom, depending on how large your thing is as well. If we click through the next slide, I have just made all of these as just like the standard text versions. And because this is erasure poetry, some of it is going to require like a little bit more like suspension of disbelief, just like give it the benefit of the doubt, all of those kinds of things. It's a little bit different than a poem that you sit and you can really like craft from scratch. But I found the process of doing it this way so interesting because this was a book that, as I read it, personally made me feel very less than, very like it talks down to anyone who's not British, and it talks up the Britishness so much that it's like really overwhelming. I will stop talking and I will start going through some of the poems. So if you notice at the top here where it says the values of the UK, the text there is larger. That's just to indicate this is roughly a title. These pieces kind of bleed together, but they kind of can also be taken on their own. Again, it was built for exhibition, so you could kind of just like stand there for like as long as you wanted. We're doing a little bit of a different thing here tonight. But yeah, the values of the UK. British society is founded on being British, based on history and traditions, protected by expectations in British society for intolerance of life, democracy, individual liberty, tolerance of those with different beliefs and faiths. As part of citizenship, new citizens pledge, I will give my rights and freedoms and my fundamental principles to be a permanent resident or citizen of the UK. In return, the UK offers a religion of unfair discrimination. Parliament can be traced to noblemen and the leaders of the church. The king's power forced his noblemen to agree to the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta established the idea that the king was the law. It protected the nobility and the king's power. Poetry and drama in England. Growing patriotism, a feeling of pride in being English. English explorers tried to expand British trade into the Spanish colonies in the Americas. English settlers began to colonize the eastern coast of America. This colonization by the next two kings greatly increased in the next century, yet the period is remembered for the richness of its poetry and drama. The slave trade. Prosperity was sustained by the booming slave trade. Slavery within Britain itself was a fully established industry dominated by Britain. Slaves came primarily from West Africa. The living and working conditions for slaves were very bad. Many slaves tried to escape, and others revolted against their owners in protest at their terrible treatment. However, people in Britain opposed the slave groups and petitioned Parliament to support slavery. The American War of Independence. By the 1760s, British colonies were wealthy and largely in control of North America. They were interested in an attack on freedom and said there should be no independence. The right to vote. As the middle classes grew, the Reform Act of 1832 abolished voting. This meant that members of the working class were unable to vote. A movement began to demand the working classes and other people without property be unsuccessful. But in 1867, there was another Reform Act. Parliament reduced the amount of men and women. Politicians realized that voters needed to be sure of Parliament. Parties began to create voters. Every adult followed in the next century. The future of the empire. The British Empire was already late about its future. Supporters believed that the empire benefited Britain. Others thought the empire had become a drain on resources. Yet the British people believed in the empire as a force for war. The British settlers fought fiercely, and many died in the fighting. Some people began to question whether Britain was, for the most part, an orderly empire with independence. And then this last one, I'll talk a little bit about these at the end. But this last one, as I was going through doing these erasure poems, it's really tricky in some ways because you're kind of finding alternate potential histories and narratives that are in this text that have never existed and don't exist, but somehow feel representative of the truth. And while that is a really interesting experience, especially if you're neurodivergent and you love problem solving and puzzles and all of these things, after doing this over and over and over and over and over through like 180 pages, 3, 4, 5 times through that many pages, I started feeling so stifled at the fact that none of these were my words. I was really beholden to only letting, the British government kind of speak for itself and try to present a fictionalized true version of of what the British government feels like to me and to many other people. And so for this last one, I actually sort of flipped the script, and so I took a page and I just blacked everything out and I just wrote over it. So if we actually skip to the next slide real quick, I put these in the wrong order. So this is what it looked like. And I decided to sign it just as immigrant because, like, I don't know, in this context, that's really all that matters about me. That's really the only meaningful thing. So if we go back to the actual text, I'll read this out. But this was just sort of almost like, sticking my fingers up at kind of like the whole process. And just being like, no, I want to reclaim my voice. This is erasure poetry. I know this is not what you're supposed to do, but at the same time, like, I have the power here. And this is the one example of me just taking that power and running with it. So yeah, no erasure. The cost of living shouldn't be giving up who we are for fear of safely fitting into cultural expectations. We will not surrender ourselves. There will be no erasure, UK. Signed, immigrants. And yeah, for me, I don't know, I guess, how these erasure poems are hitting you now. Like I said, I understand it's a very different vibe, and I knew it was like a little bit of a gamble, but I did just want to go through this because I think it potentially opens up some really interesting conversations. And I'm sure if you are British, even if you're anti-colonial and you've unpacked a lot of internalized propaganda, from the government and everything. I'm sure some of that still sounds and feels like shocking and wrong, but I think as an outsider, at least, what was really fascinating about it was how true a lot of the resulting work felt to me, in terms of my experience of the UK government, even though the words were often in almost direct contradiction to what the book was trying to emphasize on that particular topic. But I suppose that says something about the nature of propaganda, and perspective. At the end, if you click through a couple of slides real quick, there's also just some interesting numbers. One more. Boom. This was one of the walls, and it just has a bunch of the costs associated with becoming a citizen here in the UK. And again, I know colonization is much bigger than this, but I think this is really interesting. On average, it costs between sort of like 10 and 14,000 pounds, and a lot of the prices have come way up even since this. But I just think it's really interesting. Wanted to leave that there for afterwards. If people want to look back at it, we can sort of give the link. But if you click through one more time, I thought this was really interesting because, like, what's the total emotional cost of all this? And I think that's kind of like what the whole conversation around colonialism and colonization should be as well, is like, what is the emotional toll that it takes? In the same way that toxic masculinity doesn't just hurt people of marginalized genders, it also hurts men. What is the emotional cost of the people who suffer directly from colonization, in terms of, you know, these countries going out and taking over, but also what does that do to the people living there? Like, I know there's a big surge in people nowadays in the UK, where the older generation, if they're asked, you know, are you proud to be British? They're like, oh, absolutely, and this is why, and that's why, and the other thing. And the younger generations don't feel that at all. It's at least not numerically in an equivalent way. Like, most of the younger generation that's been polled is no, I'm not at all proud to be British. I don't think we do anything good. I want to get out of here as soon as I can. And I think that's like the real cost of empire eventually, you know, just trickling down. It's one-time trickle down economics makes any sense, in my opinion. But anyway, if I still have time, because I know that maybe took a little longer than I thought, there is one final poem. And it is a little more a little more silly narrative and lighthearted. But it's called My First Act as an Immigrant. Have you ever been so happy to be somewhere that you instinctively got down on your hands and knees to greet the dirt and leaves with pursed lips and repeated pleas of praise be, because you were unsure of what to do with the joy coursing through you? Anyone? No? Just me. At the time, my fiance and I had been separated 1 month shy of a year, by over 5,000 miles of earth, sky, and sea, an experience that had inspired no end of imagined earlier romantic reunions I'd pay for by selling whatever anyone could cut out of my body without killing me on the spot, which, after an alarming number of Google searches later, I learned was a list of body parts full of surprising stuff, but one that never included the human heart. So when I say walking off that plane, my American foot falling towards foreign English soil, I felt every bit like Neil Armstrong. One small step for man, one giant step for my long-distance relationship. I mean it. I was the first person to walk on the moon, and every explorer, the second they finally came home, I was fully me, overwhelmed, sentimental, effusive. But as I dropped to my knees, heads turned, and it occurred to me that, having been mistaken for a member of the Taliban during my previous European excursions, maybe my skin wasn't the right color to be doing something like this. And while I wasn't opposed to being labeled a terrorist for love, I curbed my enthusiasm, stood back up, and tightly held my tongue, tried to act like everyone else. Looking back, I find it sadly fitting that my first act as an immigrant was stifling my joy for the fear I'd lose my chance at safety. So yeah, that was my time. Thanks so much for having me, and hopefully, yeah, there's some cool stuff in there. I know this is like a little bit different than an in-person thing where we like, let's go around and have a Q&A. Like, let's like, it's hard as well because like you got the stuff on, so I can't tell what people's reactions were. But I trust that you know what, there's always going to be something in there that people connect with enough, that it'll spark some cool stuff. So if you want to talk about this ever, see me in person, awesome. Also, I'm online and always down to chat.
Amazing. Please unmute yourselves. Go absolutely wild for Chris Campbell.
Woo!
Amazing. Chris, thank you so much for that tonight. Yeah, wow, I'm still digesting, but thank you very, very much. That was incredible. Okay, cool. Well, we have 2 more performers for you tonight, and then that will be it. So just a reminder that if you are doing anything, if you want us to follow you, if you want us to know what you're up to, please put it in the chat. We want to find you, we want to follow you, we want to know what you're up to, we want to celebrate you and be behind you all the way. So if you've been performing or not, please put it in the chat so for us to pick up and have a look at. As we carry on with the night. We've got 2 more wonderful readers for you. We've got the fabulous Caroline Walling, next. So let me tell you about Caroline as she comes to the microphone. So Caroline is a published performance poet, writer and teacher. Born and raised in mid-Wales, then forged in the northeast. Member of TWOOMPH Poets. Whoop whoop! Caroline has performed at festivals and events, including Festival of Thrift and Tall Ships. Her poetry involves an honest and passionate voice delivered with emotional physicality. She's just completed a residency at Drake the Bookshop in Stockton and is currently working on her first poetry collection. So please go absolutely wild for Caroline as she comes to the microphone.
Thanks, everybody. Good evening. What a fabulous night. It's always great to be here listening or performing at TWOOMPH. Fantastic. Thanks very much for that, Chris, as well. Very thought-provoking. There's a lot there, isn't there? Okay, I'll crack on. I put this in last minute, so these are kind of ones that I'm just throwing in there, and I just hope you enjoy them. This is just one of my silly kind of children's poetry kind of silliness that I like to write. The importance of cutlery. Mind the things you use to help you eat and drink. Before you choose your implement, stop and have a think. A masher is distressing for what it does to cake. A chopping knife is dangerous for sucking chocolate flakes. A fork for sipping soup needs the spaces filling in. A spoon is bad at stabbing peas. They shoot off with a ping. A sieve can never do the job of holding in your tea. A saucepan is poor substitute for slicing through your cheese. Toothpick, it's quite poor for slurping up your jelly. A garlic press for prawns could leave your fingers smelly. A chopping board is useless for your mother's Sunday stew, and an ice cream soup for beefsteak will never ever do. So, at the table, listen when your parents tell you to. There's good reason why you need the cutlery you use. I'm not saying that was influenced by my own children, but it might have been. Thank you. And the next one, these are kind of the next couple of very, very short ones, and that's because I went for a week just allowing my part-time job as a learning support assistant, and the fact that I daydream quite a lot, which is not great sometimes. But just little thoughts would pop into my head and I would just jot them down and then, just transform them into something. And I just spent a whole week just kind of doing that. And this one is a maths couplet. I'm hoping that maybe some of you out there are with me. I'm definitely the second person. And I resent the people who are the first person, which is everybody else in my family. So this is a maths couplet. There are people who see numbers as a language, rolling silver from their tongue. There are people who see numbers as impossible barriers, too high to overcome. But that's it for maths, really. You either can or you can't. And this one was just inspired once, just keeping a child safe, unfortunately, for you know, an hour or so, and just sitting and letting her be. And this is essentially a list poem that came from that and that moment as well. Waiting in a room. 6 empty coat hooks. In the corner, a roll of sky. An order for Christmas left under plastic. A narrow window for the passing life. She rests now. Maybe later she will unroll the sky and fly headlong into a wide horizon. Thanks very much.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Caroline. Amazing. Oh, fantastic. Can't believe we're at our final reader for the night. We have the fabulous Shells tonight. So Shells, I hope I say your last name right, but if I say it wrong, please let me know. This is Shells Jandash. Amazing. Let me tell you about Shells. She comes to the microphone, is a Cypriot Londoner who speaks a bunch of languages and inhabits many identities. She writes about her feelings and experiences with themes including identity and mental health, as well as social injustice. Her poems have a lot of rhythm and rhyme. Looking forward to it, Shells. Take it away.
Thanks, guys. So my poem is called Not for Boys. I'm going to apologise because I wasn't sure what I was sending the document in for, so there's no punctuation in there at all. But yeah, here we go. This one is not for boys. No talk of action toys. No guns, no gory bits. No selfie for huge hits. No makeup, no wow dress. And she couldn't care less. Her mind is busy working. Real life worries lurking. Who's got time to check mirrors or cook organic dinners when there's money to be made? Bills and rent to be paid, and in between that race, she's supposed to put on a show, put makeup on her face, and pretend there is no woe. But woe is clingy, sticky, and hiding it is tricky. It can overwhelm the senses, leave no room for pretenses, and the chest tightens, and the head lightens, tingles in the skin, patience wearing thin, fight or flight alarm, losing any charm, but she notices too late, then cowers to her fate. The day is now tainted with crap she had it painted, and boys would run and hide, leaving her aside. But when she feels hope that maybe she could cope, she thinks of love and she thinks of good. She thinks of how strong she stood. That girl that glared in evil's face. She was spared though left disgraced. She has her own path to find. She will not be left behind. She will rise yet again. She will trudge through the rain. Hey, can you hear me through that noise? Or is this woman too loud for boys? That was me. Thanks, guys.
Amazing. Give it up for Shells. Woo!
Thank you.
Ah, thank you so much. What a night. Guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. So we've been Tees Women Poets. This has been TWOOMPH, and we are on every 4th Thursday of the month. Bit of a twister, but yeah, 4th Thursday. So it's not always the last Thursday, but it is always the 4th Thursday. And we are on from 6:30 till 8 as always. We now have a mini spotlight. So if you want to get involved, you want to do a little bit longer than an open mic spot, let us know. We want to celebrate you. We've got a few still still spaces kind of for those mini spotlights in the rest of the year, where the next couple are taken. And I would love it if you join us next month, next fourth Thursday in April, with Kate Fox as our headliner, the fabulous Kate Fox. So we're going to have an absolutely mint night. We have a fabulous Amanda as our mini spotlight. So it's going to be a really good night. But yeah, so apart from that, I mean, we've got 10 minutes. I want to hear what you're up to. I'd love to celebrate with you if there's things to celebrate. I want to grieve with you if there's things you're really pissed off about at the moment. We want to hear